I think quite a number of people, both within the media and actual voters themselves, are surprised at the early success of Donald Trump in the GOP primary field. I think a lot of them are really surprised with how well he's doing in the polls and how many people seem to be gravitating towards him and how many people seem to be gravitating towards his message and what he's saying and how he's saying it. Now, I've come on here and recently told you why I thought in a lot of ways Donald Trump was the perfect GOP candidate because so many things that that party is all about and that side of the fence, if you will, is all about are encapsulated in Donald Trump. Not everything. He has his moments where he definitely strays off of the reservation. But there are many things about him that do appeal to Republicans, especially on the non-establishment side of the fence, if you will. I'm not that surprised at all at his early success in the polls. I really am not. I frankly have been surprised why more people haven't taken him more seriously as a candidate because he is a serious candidate, a very serious candidate, and should not be dismissed as a joke at all. And what I've done is come up with a list of what I feel are 15 reasons why Donald Trump is doing so well in the early GOP polls, even before we've gotten to that first GOP presidential debate. Number one, you've got to look at the fact that the polling that we're seeing so far is a very small sample size. You know, polls are what polls are. When you have enough of them over a consistent period of time, then you could start to see trends and patterns develop. And I think to a certain degree, with the polls we've seen thus far, while they are a small sample size and that doesn't automatically make them 100% correct, some of the trends we're starting to notice could indicate that this is somewhat legitimate. However, those polls might not exactly accurately represent who will actually caucus or vote in the primary season come the early portion of 2016. These polls could be going after registered voters who, just because they're registered doesn't mean they're going to vote in any way, shape, or form. Primary, caucus, general election doesn't matter. But even with likely voters, these could be likely voters that only are likely to vote in the general election. They might not be likely to go to a caucus or go vote in the primaries. Like for me, as an example, I'm somebody that's very, very likely to vote in the general election, but since I'm neither a registered Republican or a Democrat, I'm very unlikely as a registered voter to vote on any side of the fence in a primary or participate in a caucus, let's say, depending on the state I was in. Number three, I think name recognition is playing a big role early. The only person in this presidential race on either side of the fence that could potentially match up and measure up to Hillary Clinton's name power, her star power, her name recognition is Donald J. Trump. And there's no question that Donald Trump comes in with huge name recognition, which can both hurt and help him. But the one thing that he brings with him is he's made an impression on just about everybody. And that's something that you just can't buy this early in the process. Many of these campaigns will spend many millions of dollars in the months to come trying to buy the type of impression that Donald Trump as a candidate, as a person, an individual, has already made on so many voters on both the Republican and Democratic side of the fence. You also got to look at the fact, too, along with that name recognition, the free press the media is giving Donald Trump has to be a godsend. You can make a good impression, you can make a bad impression, no impression at all. Well, you're not worried about that no impression at all with Donald Trump, as I just referenced. The press that he's getting from the media, the liberal media, the conservative media, the fair and balanced media, if you will, all of this media attention is just a bunch of free publicity for Donald Trump, where he's not having to dip into the campaign coffers, into his own personal bank account, his own assets or finances. I mean, you just can't buy that type of attention, and that definitely plays a role in his name recognition when it comes time for these pollsters to go poll registered and likely voters. You also got to look at number five. Other candidates aren't exactly incredibly appealing right now on the GOP side, in part because a lot of them aren't that well known, but a lot of them are just more of the same. And for a Republican Party that has Obama fatigue clearly and is tired of having a Democrat in the White House, they want somebody that's not going to be like Mitt Romney or John McCain. And a lot of these guys, frankly, come across as they're going to be like Mitt Romney or John McCain. And then you also look at it too, these other candidates have really done little to positively distinguish themselves in any way, shape, or form. Where Trump is getting all types of press, good, bad, and otherwise, a lot of these guys are just kind of getting swept aside. They're getting lost in the shuffle, and they're not doing anything to really help themselves distinguish who they are and what they're for, and they're not standing out at all. And all the while, Donald Trump continues to stand out, and if anything, widen his gap against an ever-growing GOP field. Number 7, you got to look at it too, especially this early in the process. The establishment of the GOP is really divided on who they want to support early. Usually as the GOP process comes along and there's that one tried and true, traditional, paid his dues establishment type of candidate, more and more establishment forces within the GOP in that primary season will start to throw their resources, their efforts, their energies, their money behind that candidate. The party will start to unite a little bit more behind that one guy. But you've got so many people right now in the field, and in particular, big names like Jeb Bush and Scott Walker and guys like John Kasich and so on and so forth. The establishment right now is really trying to figure out who they want to get on the side of the fence of. They're kind of blowing in the breeze. They're not really sure where they want to go. So as a result, Donald Trump is capitalizing upon that and gaining some momentum in the polls right now. Number 8, when we look at it, going past some of the circumstances and situations and we get to the man, you got to look at the fact that he has a lack of a filter or political thinking. And for a lot of people, that's refreshing. Even for somebody like me who will never vote for Donald Trump, does not particularly like the man very much, there is something refreshing at least about the fact that a guy is going to say what he believes and what he thinks and isn't worried about the consequences. He isn't concerned about if it's going to hurt people's feelings or what they think. He's going to say what he believes, damn it all. And so often so many people claim that that's what they want out of a politician when at the end of the day they just want a politician that will tell them what they want to hear instead of sometimes maybe what they need to hear. And when you look at Trump, you don't have to worry about him having a filter. He's not going to be all measured and political in what he says. He's going to say what he's going to say, and he's going to contrast anybody on the Republican side, and certainly even anybody on the Democratic side. No question about it. Number 9, he's also got a confidence and a swagger that projects a firm leadership that Republicans really love. This is something that they love so much about Ronald Reagan in the 80s, and frankly, until the very end, they won't admit it, but they loved about George Bush in the 2000s. The GOP establishment and even the non-establishment, but Republican voters as a whole, they love those confident leaders that are full of swagger and belief in oneself and what they're about and what their policies are and what their policies are going to do. And nobody in this campaign, especially on the GOP side, emits more confidence, more swagger, more self-belief and self-conviction than Donald J. Trump. And Republicans are gravitating towards that. It's a trait that that side of the aisle really, really likes. Where Democrats really like, it seems, the smooth talkers and the suave guys, the guys that have the ability to almost be kind of Teflon and things don't really stick to them. Republicans have their traits they really like too, and one of them is a strong, firm, confident leader. And Donald Trump exudes a lot of those qualities in their eyes. Number 10, I think people believe, at least some voters within the GOP believe the country needs to be run more like a business, especially when we're talking about national debt, when we're talking about unemployment rates, we're talking about wages, we're talking about tax rates, all of these different things. There are definitely segments of the Republican Party that believe this country should be run more like a business, and who's been a more successful businessman on either side of the aisle, but especially in the GOP field, than Donald Trump. Who? I mean, so he has more business credibility and more business acumen than anybody else in this field. And as a result, those people that are very business-minded and view this country in a way where it should be run like a business are naturally going to gravitate to a guy that they look at as very CEO-like. Less commander-in-chief-like, more CEO-like, and Donald Trump is more CEO-like than commander-in-chief type. But when we talk about the commander-in-chief stuff, this is also a guy, number 11, you're talking about who talks very tough on immigration, talks very tough on terrorism. His talk is tough, matching the confidence and swagger that he exudes as a candidate. And for the Republican Party, they're a party that loves that tough talk on immigration, that anti-amnesty crowd, if you will. They also love that talk on terrorism and that war on terrorism and all this other garbage. Well, nobody's talking tougher right now in a way than Donald Trump. Again, another reason for some of these Republican voters, when you factor in all the free press that he's getting, the name recognition that he has, the lack of ability of other candidates in the GOP field to distinguish themselves right now, and the fact that we're so early in the process, naturally more people are going to be drawn to Donald Trump like moths to a light bulb. Number 12, I think there's a big belief, since he's already a billionaire and a multi-time billionaire, that he is his own big interest. And while a lot of people might not like him personally, and they might disagree with the way he's conducted his life in some ways, in terms of being married multiple times and this and that, there are plenty of people that are tired of their politicians being bought and paid for by special interests, and they look at Donald Trump and say, why would he need to be bought by billionaires? They don't think he's going to be bought by big interest. And when you look at a Democratic side where you see Hillary Clinton, you know she's going to be bought and paid for by a certain group of entities such as big banks and so on. And then you look at candidates like Jeb Bush and Scott Walker, and you know that they're going to be bought and paid for by certain interests, whether they're the Koch brothers or oil companies, like in the case of Jeb Bush, or Bernie Sanders with the unions. There's this belief that everybody in the field is going to be bought and paid for and beholden to some type of big interest, where a lot of voters might not feel that that's the case for Trump, and I understand that. You look at it also, too, many will view him as a very potentially Perot-like type of third-party candidate. For so many disenfranchised voters, frankly, on either side of the fence, registered Republicans or registered Democrats, they're tired of the two-party system. A lot of independents are tired of the two-party system. I know I most certainly am tired of the two-party system. And when we look at Donald Trump and what he brings to the table and the resources he has behind him, you look at him and you say, this is a chance for the first time in 20 years to have a real legitimate additional option, whether you vote for him or not. The more options I think we have, and legitimate ones at that get the fair crack to be able to have 50 state ballot access, to be able to participate in the major 3 presidential debates, I think it's a good thing for the system. It's a good thing for our democracy. And I think many other voters look at it that way too. They look at a guy like Donald Trump and believe that he could be a legitimate third-party candidate. And with so much frustration and anger over the two-party system, you both take divergent paths to get to the exact same fucking crappy result. Donald Trump could represent change and something different. You're also looking at the early stages of a campaign where, frankly, it's about soaring rhetoric and not really about specifics on policies. This is what Obama did in 2007 and 2008 early on, especially in 2007 once he announced. It was about the soaring rhetoric. It was about the grandiose. It was about the ambiance of Obama and what his campaign could mean, and the way he chose his words and how he presented himself and presented those words. It wasn't about specifics. It most certainly wasn't about policies. But at that stage of the process, he was able to figure out how to resonate with the types of voters he was going to need to resonate with to first be able to defeat Hillary and the Clinton machine in the primary season, and then be able to go on and win the presidency both in 2008 and 2012. And Donald Trump, I don't know if you necessarily call his rhetoric soaring, but, he has his own type of rhetoric, but he's not incredibly specific about policies and laws and these type of things, and that's not necessarily a bad thing for him at this point in time. The less specific he could be for the longer period of time, the better off it's going to be for Donald J. Trump as a candidate, I assure you. But I think the biggest reason of all that Trump is appealing to so many people right now on the GOP side when it comes to these early presidential polls, especially in this primary season, is the fact that he's the ultimate political and Washington outsider. Now, sure, people are going to sit there and point to somebody like a Dr. Ben Carson as a political outsider, and you've got a point there. He's a Washington outsider. But at the same point in time, he doesn't carry with him the name recognition and the resources that a Donald Trump does, and the free press from the media on all sides that a Donald Trump does. When people look at the way he conducts himself, the way he carries himself, the lack of filter or political thinking that he has, the confidence and swagger that he has, the belief in himself, the tough talk that he exudes, the belief that he won't be bought by big interests, where we would have that concern with somebody like a Dr. Ben Carson, it makes him the ultimate political and Washington outsider. And for so many people, as part of this political process heading into 2016, that grow increasingly disenfranchised by the process and by the two-party system, and frankly will continue to be not impressed by candidates on either side of the fence. They look at somebody like Donald Trump and he's different. And that difference carries a lot of weight. And I think in large part, that is carrying the weight with him right now in these early polls, in part because he's getting the people that back him and believe in him to really back him and believe in him. There's going to be a large segment that hates him, a large segment that will never support him, even amongst the Republican Party, let alone independents, let alone Democrats. But right now, he is that ultimate political Washington outsider, and that is helping to carry the day. With that said, a lot of people will point to this and saying that Donald Trump is ultimately the one to be. He could be the next president of the United States. And while anything is possible, I do want to advise people to not to read too much into these early polls. It's time to pump the brakes just a little bit first. We haven't even had the first GOP debate yet. We haven't even had the first major debate. To get that first major debate, to me, that's when this season really begins. That's when the 2016 presidential race officially kicks off. It's not when everybody announces. It's not the crappy stump speeches and appearances in the summer. It's that first debate. That's when it's shit and get time. That's when it's assholes and elbows. That's when you start to separate the pretenders from the legitimate contenders. We haven't even had one of those debates yet. So a lot of these candidates, when people are getting polled, they barely know who they are, or they most certainly aren't very familiar with them or their records or anything like that, or how they present themselves, or if they look presidential or not. So that's part of the process too. I mean, and we still got 5+ months till we get to the primary and caucus season. That's a lot of time to go, and we see it all the time where you get people that get out to big leads, they become the presumptive nominees, and then shit happens. Look at 2004 with Howard Dean. Where did John Kerry come from? You look at, frankly, 2008. 2008. You know, Hillary Clinton was supposed to be the presumptive nominee. She was going to be the one. She was going to cakewalk. And then all of a sudden, here came Barack Obama and just totally wrecked shit up. You know, that could happen again here in 2016. It's not to say that Donald Trump is necessarily being viewed as a presumptive nominee, but he's that guy. He's out front. Remember, 4 years ago, Rick Perry was out front too at one point in time, as was Herman Cain, and we know what ended up happening in both of those cases. So we can't read too much into it too early, although it can present you with some trends and some things to look at. You know, I also think that Trump is benefiting greatly from the fact that this field is spread so thin with so many people in it that you've got this person getting 2%, 3%, 3%, 4%, 5% support. A lot of these people might align with somebody else that wasn't Donald Trump, let's say, if there were, instead of 16, 17 candidates, maybe 6 or 8. So maybe that lead is a bit misleading. And frankly, I think it is because the field is so big, the support is spread out so incredibly thin over so many people that the people that really like Trump are the ones that are gravitating to him. But there is still a large number and a vast majority of Republicans in the primary process that do not like Donald Trump, that do not like what he represents or what he says or what he believes in, don't view him in any way presidential, don't think he has a shot in the world of winning the general election, and they're not going to support him. So as people start to slowly tick off and drop off in the race, Trump's numbers could potentially stay steady or even drop slightly, and other people's numbers could start to rise. So like I said, there's a lot of time left. And another thing that's concerning too, we talk about Donald Trump and his dominance in the early GOP primary polls in the early primary states. That's one thing. The concerning thing has to be, at least for Republicans, if you think that there's a shot that Trump could be the nominee, is that while Jeb Bush and Scott Walker in certain states are faring well against Hillary Clinton, they're within the margin of error or not that far away from the margin of error, or in some cases, depending on who does the poll, they're either beating Hillary within the margin of error or slightly outside of it. Donald Trump consistently gets his ass kicked head up against both Hillary Clinton and feel the burn frickin' 70-plus-year-old Bernie damn Sanders. So he might be enjoying success in some ways on the GOP side of the fence early on, but in a lot of ways I think that is potentially fool's gold when you look at the bigger picture and you really see where that doesn't translate necessarily to a general election where you've got a Hillary Clinton with not even really factoring in a bill into the process, because again, Hillary is on Hillary right now, and you're not really throwing Bill in, and we're very early in the process, and a lot of people still have unfavorable views of her going back to the 90s. She's kicking Trump's ass consistently head-to-head in national polls by 12 plus percentage points. What good does it do for Donald Trump to have a quarter of the GOP support him now, when that still means 3/4 of the GOP doesn't, and he's not polling well on the national stage against Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders, and even Joe freaking Biden? I mean, it shows that Donald Trump is, in a lot of ways, that lightning rod, that very divisive type of presence, in the sense that the people that really like him, really, really like him, and they're going to continue to like him, no matter who else is involved. So that is what in part makes him a somewhat legitimate, to be taken seriously, third-party candidate, which is, I think he ultimately is, and I think that's what he ultimately should run as at some point in time, even if he goes through a certain portion of the Republican primary process. But when you're talking about a guy that has such high unfavorable ratings, not just amongst all people, but Republicans in general, and you look at the field spread so thin that as it starts to narrow down, that support is going to go other places. So many people are going to be aghast of Donald Trump and what he believes in, that I still find it very, very unlikely that he ends up being the GOP nominee. Anything can happen. Many things are possible. But, once we get into the actual politics game and we actually get into running a political campaign, that's where the seasoned veteran politicians could end up really schooling Donald Trump, and that's really where, more than anything else, Donald Trump could ultimately suffer, and it could cost him on the GOP side, to where he would have to pull out and run a third-party candidate, and then he could really screw up the GOP by helping Hillary walk to the White House in 2016.